A moment of silence for the addict out there who's still suffering. Okay, set aside prayer. Dear God, please set aside anything we think we know about ourselves, our disease, about the big book, the 12 steps, the program, the fellowship, the people in the fellowship, and all spiritual terms, especially you, God, so that we may have an open mind and a new experience with all of these things. Please help us to see the truth. Amen. All right. So, my name is Justin, and I'm an addict, and thanks to my God, the steps, and the fellowship of other addicts, I'm sober one day at a time since June 19th, 2015, and for that, I am beyond grateful. Welcome to the RECO12 speaker meeting. We are an organization whose addictions include alcohol, drugs, lust, and sex, food, and gambling, just to name a few. We come together from all places, faiths, and backgrounds to learn the similarities of addiction and to gain tools and hope from others who are walking a similar path. We invite recovering addicts with at least 1 year of sobriety and who are actively working their recovery in their respective fellowships to share their experience, strength, and hope on a live Zoom webinar each Friday at noon Central Time for 20 to 25 minutes. Then we, the live audience, get the opportunity to ask questions of that speaker for another 20 to 25 minutes. If you are hearing this meeting in recorded podcast form and would like to participate as a live audience member in the future, please go to www.reco12.com. That's RECO12.com to learn more and submit your email address there to receive weekly invitations. RECO12 is a self-supporting service, and we appreciate your help in helping us work our 12 step in this manner. We gratefully accept contributions to help cover the cost of the Zoom platform, podcast platform, web hosting, and administrative costs. To contribute, you can go to reco12.com/support, or you can click the link to PayPal in the live meeting or in the show notes. And when you contribute, please specify the meeting number. This is meeting number 45. Last week's meeting was with Robert Pardon and was really a fantastic meeting with the perspective of a person actively working the 12 steps of recovery and sober for over 35 years. If you missed hearing that very powerful meeting or any other meeting we have done, you can listen to them in podcast form by searching for RECO12 Speaker Meeting Podcast on virtually any podcast platform that you use. Or you can go to the RECO12 website and find it under the link podcast. Now, a quick favor to those of you listening on the podcast platform, please hit pause right now and go and rate and review RECO12. It really helps us get this message out to more addicts who suffer and who want diverse speakers about their own experiences, strength, and hope to learn from. One more word about our speakers before we introduce today's speaker. When we line up a speaker for a meeting, we ask them to seek guidance on what and how to present so that they can reflect the light they have been given. That light will inspire hope, meaning, worth, and growth in each of us, the listening audience. Now, let's introduce our guest speaker for today, John S., whose topic is Cut the Junk and Do the Work. John is a recovering alcoholic with over 5 years sobriety. He co-hosts a weekly podcast with his best friend and longtime drinking buddy, Jerry W., called A is for Alcoholic. Their hope is that in discussing their shortcomings and failings, others might not have to make the same mistakes. Take it away, John. The floor is yours until the bottom of the hour.
Thank you. Justin, thank you for inviting me to do this. Thank you for setting all this up and doing what you do. Much appreciated. And that's a very concise way to put our podcasts. I like that. So my name's John, and I'm an alcoholic. Hi, John. And my sobriety date is July 6th, 2015. So not too far off of yours, I believe. Yeah. And my, where to even start? My dad was an abusive alcoholic. He was manipulative. He kind of took us kids, my brother and I. And so my mom was absent, really by no fault of her own. And that was always tough. And that's always a tough thing to understand as a kid. And, I have a lot of early memories, and then I have complete, there's just memories that are gone. Like there are whole chunks of years that are gone from my childhood. So, there wasn't a lot of, it wasn't a happy childhood. And I think the first time that I ever really found that I could change the way I felt was actually, my dad was very sick for most of his life, for almost all of his life. And he died very sick and very young. But he had a lot of medication. And one of the first things they used to make, so they used to make antihistamines for like a cold or whatever, but they used to make them good where you could, you could like get a little dizzy and get a little sleepy and you'd feel really good. And I remember taking those before bed because I would get this lovely little high, and I would like swipe antihistamines from his medicine cabinet. And, later on, he also had muscle relaxers, he had somas. And so those would be things I would take to school. I would be like 14, ninth grade. And I remember geometry was first period. So about 10 minutes before geometry was done, I would go to the water fountain and I would pop a soma, and then I could sit through driver's ed, which was, who cared, right? I thought I was being responsible by taking muscle relaxers at 14 at 10 o'clock in the morning, because it's just driver's ed. So I think I started drinking alcoholically probably around 17. And I met some friends in high school, and we would go to a friend Steve's house, and we'd listen to records, and we'd listen to, put the Beatles' White Album on and drink his parents' vodka and whiskey and go get Boone's Hill Farm wine. And everything was great. Like, it was finally like, that thing we all recognize. It's like the relief and, oh my gosh. And yeah, it was really, really magical. And so I thought, this is it. This is how we're going to do this. And so then high school, and right after high school, I left my dad and I went to move with my mom in California, and I was there for a year, and I made a mess of things there. She, was overwrought with guilt and so allowed us kids to do anything and everything. And that included lots of drinking and just being all around bad, right? Just bad behavior. A year goes by, a friend of mine says, hey, let's move to Oregon. And I was like, great. Yeah, let's get out of here. I don't want to do this anymore. Live with my parents. And so we moved to Oregon, and that's really when things began to, and this is like 1996, really began to pick up the pace. And so I could drink whenever, I could do whenever I could. It was just, and then that's, living in Eugene, Oregon, there's all kinds of drugs that are available to you that were not. And you name it, and it was available. And so that began, later on in 1998, we would call the summer of drugs, because we lived in this big house. We barely paid any rent. And it was always, always, always a party. Unbeknownst to me, it was called the boys' house, because, hey, you going to the boys' house? And I didn't know that's what our house was called. So that began 17 years of drinking alcoholically, year after year after year. And as we all know, it's a lot of fun in the beginning, and there are very few consequences, and those consequences are manageable. But all of that stacks on top of itself, of each other. And I then, fast forward to like 2005, and I get a job, or 2004, and I get a job working in a bar, and I'm a bouncer. And I think I've made it once again. Like, this is it. This is where I belong. And then I get a job bartending, and I'm in control, and now I have access to all the booze. And now I am, in my mind, I not only can dispense it, but I have access to it. I can drink whenever I want. So, 5-10 years into this doing bartending, I was a bartender for, I guess, 12 or 13 years, and the last 2 of which were sober. And it was awful. It was really, really awful near the end, because I had moved back to California after spending 15 years in the Pacific Northwest by myself. I got rid of all of my networks, all of my friends, all of my connections. And that's when I think, because I took a job with somebody I trusted, and I said, well, how often does anybody call you to 10 bar and wine country? And so I went to Napa, and I that's where it started to get really, really isolating, because there was no longer the guise of drinking sociably and drinking with friends and going out and calling people, and I was just alone. And so I went to work, and maybe I'd go out to a bar, but it became increasingly, it just made more sense, and it was easier and it was cheaper for me to simply drink at home. And I'd buy booze, and sometimes there were periods, different jobs where I was a bar manager, so I had access to the booze to just take home, right? If you buy enough Grey Goose, they throw you a free bottle, and that free bottle was my weekend. And it was just horrible. And when I look back on it, it wasn't until the last straw, right, did I ever see that there was an opportunity to not do what I was doing. It was just, I'm hungover, I'm broke, everything hurts, but I have to keep drinking, because I didn't see another option. And the last straw was, excuse me, I just remember having a conversation with a woman I was in a relationship with, and I had already destroyed that relationship. And she had come over to try and reconcile or whatever. We were in a very weird spot. And she came over and we hung out, and she left. And well, before, when she came over, I had a bottle of vodka in the closet. She didn't smell it on me, or maybe she did. I have no idea. But as she left, and I drank the rest of the vodka, and I don't remember saying what I said on the phone to her, which was like, I hate you. I wish you were dead. I wish I was dead. And I don't remember that at all. Like, I cannot recall it. And that was the beginning of the end. Like, oh my God. And I had just moved into a house, gotten a new job. I just bought a car. And there was just a moment after work, after I'd been drinking after work. And I just saw it all gone. I don't know how else to explain it. I just saw, if I kept doing this, it was all gone. And I was like, I'll just take a break. I just need to take a break. And that one thing led to another, and 5 years on. So in my recovery, in Alcoholics Anonymous, I went through the steps, and I eventually got a sponsor, and I was kicking and screaming the entire time, as many of us do. I didn't take to it. I was very suspicious. I was very skeptical. But so I'm here now, 5 years on, and the topic is cut the junk and do the work, right? And so this concept for me stemmed from, and where I found it was in my getting healthy, because I didn't take my health seriously at first. It was like, as long as I'm not drinking, it doesn't matter. I was smoking cigarettes, I was eating to excess, and it wasn't until a couple of years in that I decided to start counting calories. And the first day that I counted my calories, it was like 5,600, which I saw again. I was like, oh shit, like, oh no, if I keep doing this, I'm going to kill myself with food. So when I think about cut the junk, and I went from 280 roughly, maybe a little under, and right now I'm at like 212 or something like that. I was down to 188 last year. And if the worst thing that happens to me is I gain 20 some pounds in the middle of a pandemic, then I'm feeling pretty grateful. But what I had come to realize was, cut the junk sounds like tough love, just do it, no excuses. And it's not that there aren't excuses. For me, it was trying to isolate those excuses and understand those excuses, and find a way to either dismiss them, work around them, or reform them into something I could use to better serve myself. And so I use things like, I started running, right? And I can't, for anybody who's interested in running and or recovery, I can't suggest enough anything written by Mishka Shubaly. He is somebody who really, his words transformed my life in a way. I was able to transform my life in a way that without him, I don't think that I would have. But so the thing with like health and weight and running and stuff like that, these are far more tangible things that I can look at. So, and that's how I apply it to my recovery now too, is I will take an excuse. Maybe I don't deserve it, or I'm not good enough, or a lot of it is I'm too fat. I have deal with a huge amount of body dysmorphia. And so for me, journaling works really well. And I will write in my notebook every morning. I used to do a page, and then I did 3 pages, and now I do roughly 30 minutes. And sometimes that's just staring out the window, right? And waiting for something to come. But if I'm having those negative thoughts, which we often do, that sort of on and on and on and on, I write those things down and I try to understand them rather than just ignore them. And so if it's, oh, I don't deserve to be sober, or I'm just a piece of garbage, or like I said, I'm too fat. And I use that a lot too, right? So it's like, okay, so what evidence is there of that? How does the rest of the world perceive you? Why is there this huge gap between how you perceive yourself and the rest of the world? One of the things for me is I found that it was hearing things that my father said to me and going, okay, well, I dealt with a lot of resentments and a lot of anger and a lot of frustration toward my father. And one of the things that I came to realize is all the medications that he was on for all those years, they had eaten away at his brain, not only his joints and the rest of him, but like his brain too. So that actually helped to alleviate some of that resentment. And I came to realize, oh, he was unwell. He was sick. Not only was he an alcoholic, he was dealing with the healthcare industry always. He was in and out of the hospital. He would leave us kids alone for like a week. And so all these things compounded, and he was miserable near the end. And I was miserable to be around him. We never got to reconcile anything. And so I had to do all that on my own, which was extraordinarily difficult. But the epiphany was he was sick. And that made all of that negative thought, all of that junk, all of those excuses, all of those reasons to not continue to be sober, to not take care of myself, to indulge those things. And if I can't drink, well, then I can eat, and that'll make me feel good. But what happens when we overeat, or when I overeat, is it feels good in the moment. And then what? And then I feel like garbage, and then I'm ashamed. And then I used to go in for, big bags of salami and family sized bags of peanut M&Ms. Now my indulgence is maybe too many almonds, right? Like that's not that big a deal, right? In comparison. Now it's not where I want to be, but so it's slowly, my mistakes have gotten better. My faults have gotten better. But that's kind of what I mean, because it's not, for me, tough love never worked. And I was talking to my sponsor the other day, and I said, I really appreciate that you were very gentle with me, because in the program, and thank God, and I'm so glad that there is tough love, and there is a lot of testosterone driven recovery out there. And I believe that it's valuable to a lot of people, and I wouldn't want to change it for the world, because I have gotten a lot from it, but in very small doses for me. So that being said, that's kind of how I looked at it a little more analytically, or I would look at those emotions and those feelings and that negative talk a little more, I guess, intellectually, where it's like, okay, so how does this fit in here, and how do I make this work to better serve myself? And so I just started writing it down. I do deserve this. There's no reason that I don't, right? Please, every time I have a negative thought, I'm like, okay, John, well, prove it. And I haven't been able to prove it yet, that I don't deserve this, that I'm not good enough, that I'm not doing the best that I can. I haven't been able to prove that I am worthless. And in fact, it's become quite the opposite. So when there's resistance, my suggestion is to, cut the junk, find out what those excuses are, analyze them, write them down. Are they real? Most of the time they're not. If they are real, why are they real? And what is getting in the way? Because just none of this is, in the beginning, at least, none of this is supposed to be comfortable. You're having a reckoning with yourself and all of your bad behaviors and habits. And, your entire personality, or, my entire personality was around drinking. I was a bartender, man. Like I was the cool. And so I had to just tear all of that down. So I think that that's part of, you can't do the work. And they talk about, you got to do the work. Like, what does that mean? Well, it means assessing yourself. It means creating a new habit for yourself. It means talking to another addict, alcoholic, whatever, whatever program you're in, right? It doesn't have to be AA. I mean, whatever your deal is, and finding a way to work on those things that keep popping up in your head, right? And so that's what I mean by cut the junk, is to lose those excuses. And it's not going to happen overnight. I still have things where I have huge amounts of self-doubt, and it only works by understanding where the doubt comes from and digging like a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper. I don't know when I'm going to get to the bottom of this, but hopefully before I die, but probably not. But it helps me have a better day, and it helps me to be able to actually put in the time for myself and for those around me, that I can just be of service. We like to talk about service in the program a lot, and that can mean a whole myriad of things. But it's not just making coffee and greeting people at meetings whenever we get to do that again. But yeah, so for me, it's about finding my excuses and getting around them and understanding them better, and changing the negative self-talk that was put in my head at a very young age, and I carried through for a very long time, and turning the excuses into something I can use to better heal myself and to continue to stay sober and be happy, because ultimately, or at least content, because I'm not going to be happy every day, and that's fine too. I'm going to wake up and some days I'm going to be miserable. I hurt my back yesterday, and yesterday was a miserable day. It was gorgeous outside, but I was stuck in bed, and I had to like really go, okay, well, your body's taking care of itself. So that's fine. You're doing fine. You don't need to, it wasn't a punishment from God. You know what I mean? Like, and that's another thing, like I'm being punished, I deserve it. And it's like, well, no. So that's what I mean by that. No excuses. There's plenty of excuses. Understand your excuses, and then you can work through them. And then the work comes pretty easy once I've done that. So I think that's my time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. I really love your story. I love the different angles you took at that. And I've got several questions that I wrote down. But before we get to those questions, can you take about, and let me remind the live audience to ask questions of John. Please type them in the little Q&A link at the bottom of your Zoom window. Looks like two speech bubbles over the top of each other. And we'll get to those here in a minute. But before we get to those, John, can you take about 60 seconds and tell us why your fellowship, what it does for you, how it helps you even today?
Alcoholics Anonymous was described to me this way, the big book, Life, the Missing Manual. And that's the thing that really like clicked to me was, oh, I can apply this to anything in my life. If something is troubling me, if something is bothering me. And it's also been extraordinarily crucial in that I have a problem, or even if I have a perceived problem, because many of them are perceived, that there are people there. There's a group of people who understand how I think, and that I don't have to be alone. And that has been extraordinarily helpful. And so having that group of people, what it means to me, it means community, it means support, it means I don't have to isolate myself and get stuck in those bad thoughts. It's a beautiful thing, and I couldn't imagine life without it.
Thank you so much. Something you said right towards the end of your share really resonated with me, with something that I really struggled with for decades of my life, is that God is punishing me because I'm making these poor choices. And so every little thing that went wrong in my life, I'd be like, it's God punishing me. How did you get through those voices in your head? I call those voices the small G God, who is there just to beat me down and everything. How did you get through those voices in your head, and how do you today go, you know what? No, like what you said, no, this is just my body taking care of myself. It's not punishment.
Yeah. So I'll use yesterday as an example when I was feeling sorry for myself and miserable. One of the things in Alcoholics Anonymous, when we talk about higher power and God and all that stuff, and it's difficult for a lot of people, but the thing that struck me is that it's of my own making. So I have to decide and create this higher power. And I go, well, wait a second. It was just an accident, John. You just hurt yourself and it was an accident. And your God is not a vengeful God. He is not here to smite you. And and also, let's be honest, you're not that important, John. Like, yeah, he's got bigger things to do than to punish you for lifting too heavy a weight yesterday, or for, whatever the thing is. And so that was yesterday. And so those things, reminding myself that I am small, that I am, I don't want to say insignificant, but that that my ego is not the thing that's important here, right? That I'm part of a larger picture, that I'm part of this life, and that this is just a small moment in time. That's the other thing, is that it's going to pass. It's going to pass. My back hurts and it's going to pass. So I think that that is helpful, is redefining this idea of God, so that I don't have to think every bad thing happening to me. Again, that's just me being egotistical. That's me being self-centered. And I know that that's not right. I know that that's not right. I did that. Self-will run riot. Yes, I'm well aware of that. So that's just a reaction to that. And since I don't do that anymore, at least I try. God's not interested in punishing me. That's not how he works. Not for me.
Love it, man. Good stuff. I really appreciate that perspective. You talked a little bit about your morning routine of writing, and you write for 30 minutes a day. And whether you said you're actually pen to paper for 30 minutes straight, or if you're contemplating, things as you look out the window, trying to hear that inner voice talking to you. Walk me through your routine and leading up to that. Do you do any meditation leading into it? Do you do anything like that? Or do you just sit down, pen in hand, and get going?
So my mornings up until this morning, which, because, my current injury, I don't do meditation. I used to. There was a period where I was doing it a lot, but I roll out of bed, I get down on the floor, and I do 10 push-ups. And that's my morning prayer. They're not always great push-ups, but I do 10 push-ups. Because if you want to pray to God, try to do 10 push-ups, and I promise you it will happen almost immediately. And then I make the coffee, and I usually read first. I'll read for about 30 minutes out of whatever book I'm in. And then I have my notebook, and I open it up, and I start with a prayer in there. Now, one of the things, prayer was very difficult for me. So I read in this other book, Mike Doty he was in a band called Soul Coughing back in the 90s, and he's sober now, and he wrote a book called The Book of Drugs. And in there, he was talking about his difficulty with prayer. And I was like, yeah, me too. And he said, I wrote them down in a notebook. And so I just started that. And so I start with a prayer, and then either there's something on my mind or there's not. And when there's not, I'm like, oh, the coffee tastes really good. Or there doesn't seem to be too much bird activity in the front yard. Or, wow, there's a lot of hummingbirds. Or I don't know what to write. And so honestly, that's where it starts. And somewhere something will get going, or sometimes it doesn't. But I give myself that 30 minutes. So wake up, push up, coffee, read, and then the final thing before I go and do anything else is just the 30 minutes of writing. And sometimes it's reflection, sometimes it's There's been a couple times where a poem will come up, or I started writing some weird little fiction short story. But, mostly it's just musings on the day or yesterday or something that's really bothering me, and I write it down. And if I haven't figured it out, at least it doesn't bother me as much.
Awesome. I love that whole process. Sounds like you spend hour and 15, hour and a half every morning doing this routine. Very nice. That's, sometimes when I first started into recovery, and even several years in, it was like, I can't spend that much time every morning doing this stuff. But now, as I have proven that it works for me, man, I have to set aside that time. And it's not that I have to, that it's a checklist item. It's because it works. And my day goes, not perfectly, but it goes much smoother if I do those things first and put those first. Thank you for sharing that. One of the things that you brought up, John, about that writing was you talked about the self deprecating thoughts sometimes. Hey, you're garbage, you're this, you're that. And you go through, is this real or is it not? And most of the time it's not. But sometimes you said, if it is real, then why is it real? What is important about that? Do you have an experience where that was the case, where there was something that was real, that was hard to swallow, but you were able to go through it and figure out, okay, this is real. Here's how the solution needs to happen.
Well, if it is real, I think ultimately it never is real, but in those moments where I'm like, if it's like, I'm a piece of garbage because I did this. Okay, so let's go through that. So you did something that goes against your values. Well, why did you do that? What were you trying to gain from it? What were you trying to, who were you trying to manipulate? And so ultimately it comes down to, if that bad thought about myself seems real, it's usually linked to or attached to something I did or said that goes against my values. And so I have to reconcile those things, either by making an amends to the person that I did the thing to, or if it's just to myself, going, okay, well, we don't do that anymore. So as a reflection, that's not you. You don't do that anymore, John. So that can't be true anymore. If it was true for a moment, then it was true. But now we have to move on, because we can't live there, right? That's the past. And if I can't wallow in regret. I've done that. It doesn't work. But what I can do is take those things from the past and use them to create lessons and a pathway for the future. Okay. So that didn't work. That's a bad way of behaving. That's a bad habit to have. Let's do the opposite of that, and let that be what we do in the future, so that doesn't ever have to happen again.
Thank you very much, John. I appreciate that. And reminder to our live audience, you can type questions in the Q&A link at the bottom of your Zoom window, and we'll read those as they come in. I've got another question here for you, John. How the heck did you stay sober for 2 years as a bartender after all of that time? That's crazy. I'd like to hear that story.
So I got sober, and that was the job, and that was the job that paid the best, and that was the job that I knew, because I'd been doing it for a decade. So there was no option other for work that was going to pay me as well. And at the time, and so I just looked at it as, well, two things. Not every, it's not like being a bank teller is going to make you a bank robber, right? They count money all day. They're not stealing it. So I realized, okay, this is just what I deal in. I don't have to partake in this. But also, being a bartender, you have a front row seat to the nightly behaviors of alcoholics through and through, right? I have seen some of the worst behaviors that humanity has to offer. Anybody who's been in a bar or been drunk in a bar or been around people who are drunk in a bar, I don't need to go into the details. So that became sort of a reminder. So every time that something would happen, or I'd see somebody who was sloppy, or I would see, grown men twice my age, maybe not that old, but, older than me, fall off of bar stools. And I was like, oh, that's what I'm trying to avoid. This is me getting a front row seat at the things I do not want to be. And so it became sort of a reminder, rather than a temptation. And I think that really helped me in going out into the world and not being afraid to go somewhere where there's alcohol and not feeling like I had to avoid it, which, avoid it if you have to until but it's not going away for me. It's always going to be there. They're always going to make more booze. It's always going to be around in the world. So, it wasn't difficult in the way that you might think, where I was tempted, because I kind of made this choice and I always knew that it was always there. I live in a house and there's booze in the other room, but it was difficult in that it was wearing thin on me and I wasn't getting the stuff, the spiritual, emotional stuff that I needed from that job. So I eventually had to quit entirely, but yeah, it was kind of like being a bank teller, I guess.
No, that's very interesting. And I want to sit there for one more question, I think. So you saw all those same things for the 10 years leading up to that last 2 years. You saw the same people doing the same things. And you shared kind of what your wake up call was in that phone call with the woman that you were in a relationship with. But how did seeing those same things shift? How did you shift your perspective or perception of those same things at that time?
So it was 4th of July weekend, and I just remember I just moved into this house, and I kind of have some part-time roommates, and they were home one night. I made a ruckus trying to get something out of the fridge, another drink, something like that. They didn't say anything, but I knew it was a ruckus. I'd been drinking at work and then driving home. So I was drinking and driving in this new car that I had. I was making a ruckus at my house. I was drinking at a new job, at a new bar job. And so all of this culminated, and I remember it was a horrible, horrible hangover, and I had to work through it all night. And I came home and I was just sitting on the couch with this Pacifico. And it was all of those things. It was the relationship. It was the car. It was the house that I was in. It was the job that I had just gotten. And things seemed to be moving in a good-ish direction for somebody who was drinking their life away. And I just saw it all going away, and I didn't know where that led. I didn't imagine myself homeless, but where else does one go? I didn't imagine myself without a car, without a job. I had already lost this relationship, and I just thought, oh God, this is bad. This is something has to change. And it was out of just sheer self-preservation that I don't remember if I finished the beer or not. There was nothing dramatic about that, except that I was just sitting on the couch, and I remember that being my last drink. And I was like, okay, all right, so let's just take a week off and get your act together. Now, I had had a friend who had lived in this house before me, and he had left some of his furniture here, and including his nightstands, which he was nice enough to leave a big book in for me. And that was part of it. And so I reached out to him and I said, hey, what do I do? And he's like, go to a meeting. And I said, I don't want to. He's like, just go to a meeting. We've all heard this story before. And ultimately, that's what led me into figuring it out. But yeah, it was just, I don't know how I just saw it all. I looked around and I saw everything gone. And that was what spurred me to stop.
Man, that's a great story. I appreciate that. Go to a meeting. Tell me about the first meeting you went to. What was your mindset? What gave you the courage to walk through those doors that first time? That was the scariest steps I think I ever took in my life, was walking through those doors the first time.
So, it was in the back end of a community center, and I promised my friend, I didn't do it for myself. I did it for him. But I said, okay, I'll go to that Sunday morning meeting. Well, I worked late on Saturday nights, and I said, well, I'll go, but I'm not going to set my alarm. Well, I woke up early anyway, for some reason. Damn it. Okay, fine. I'll get up and I'll go. And so I drove down there, and I went into the front of the community center. I was like, I can't find anything. If I don't find this place, I'm not going to go. And I was looking around and I said, okay. And then if I can't find somebody to ask, I'm just not going to go. I'm going to leave. And I walk into somebody and they're like, oh no, it's back here. And so I found it and I walked in, and typical folding tables, couches, chairs, coffee, donuts. It was a speaker meeting. I don't remember the speaker. I don't remember. I mean, I remember sitting on a couch in the back and just feeling, um, you know, people say like I felt super raw. And I think that's probably the best way to feel it, because I felt everything, and I felt it was all bad, right? If everything hurt and everything was awful and I was so confused. And I don't remember if I cried that one or the next one, but there was some deep there were some deep emotions for sure, listening to other people talk about this stuff and going, oh God, there's a real problem here that I need to address in my own life, and I don't want to. And then I just started going once a week for a while before I did anything real. But that became like the anchor, was that if I go to this meeting every Sunday morning, everything will be okay. And then, ultimately it didn't become enough, and I needed more. But in the beginning, I just remember being in that room and being really, really sad and being angry and being resentful and being like, I don't belong here. And who are these people? And just being, all the typical stuff that we hear about just being hateful and resentful toward all these people who just want to help, help themselves and help you. So it was the best thing I ever did, because it's led me to be here right now.
Yeah, and you shared the emotions you said I felt, and everything was hard. It was bad. And then, these emotions of hateful, resentful to these people who are just trying to help. How did that shift? I mean, if I'm going into a room like that and I'm feeling those things, if I'm listening from the outside, I'm going to go, well, why the heck would I go into a room like that? That's not going to help me. So how did that shift from I need to be here, I hate it here, to I want to be here? This is really helping.
I think one of the things was, I had a moment in one of those first few meetings where I started crying and it felt good, right? Like I was releasing some of this poison. It also helped that I had, a couple of friends, my buddy Jerry, who I co-host the podcast with, who had been about a year sober before me. And then my other friend who had a few years. And so I was able to kind of report back to them. And I had them as sort of an example to go to. But I think I kept going back because I finally knew after like 17 or 18 years, maybe more like 20, almost 20 years of drinking, that wasn't the answer. Like I could look back and see the evidence that wasn't going to lead me anywhere. Just getting back, drinking again wasn't going to lead me anywhere. So if there's something here, I should probably try and find it. And again, I was still skeptical. I kind of felt like it was more of like, I'm a investigative journalist or I'm a detective and I'm going to figure this out and I'm going to find all the cracks and I'm going to find all the reasons why this isn't going to work for me. And as I began to do that, through all that skepticism, I found all of the things that did work for me, which was, basically all of it.
Good stuff, man. All right. I have one or two more questions. If anybody else from the live audience has a question, type it in there before we get wrapped up here in a couple minutes. The next question I have for you, you talked about, and I'm assuming this was probably in your step 9 amends making process. You talked about the realization that your dad, he was unwell. He was sick. In addition to the alcoholism and everything. Well, even if it was just alcoholism, just unwell and sick. How did that compassion, that light bulb, or the shift of perception there with the compassion for your father, how did that change things moving forward with other relationships in your life with imperfect people like we are?
Mm-hmm. So two different men in the program shared, and one of them talked about his mother, and he had mentioned the exact medication, one of the exact medication. My dad's cupboard was filled with stuff, but that my father was on, and how it had affected the brain as well as it affected the joints. And I don't think they prescribe this stuff anymore, but fortunately. But that was a light bulb that was like, oh, wait a second. So it wasn't just him being mean. He was being affected by these other things. So it wasn't him just being sick. It was also the medication. And so that was a thing where I was a little bit like a little crack of forgiveness and understanding, like a little seed of forgiveness. And that's what it took for me to begin to forgive him after, he's been gone a while now, and to let that out of me because I was holding on to it for a very long time and it was always his fault and everything that was wrong with my life was his fault. And then somebody else, another gentleman said something about writing a letter. And I've written a couple of letters, one to my father, and we did an episode where we wrote goodbye letters to alcohol in general. And that was very emotional too, because I was getting this stuff out. So I think that was what really, those two things really planted the seed for the forgiveness to let go of the resentment toward my father, because I can't reconcile with him. He's dead, right? It's all got to happen. And it was mentioned to me too that might be even easier than dealing with somebody who is still sick and alive. And I was like, oh, okay. Interesting. My father's dead and it might be easier. Okay, well, let's just go with that because I want to go with what's easy. And so I think realizing that the resentment was all in here helps me when I go and deal with other people, when I'm in other relationships and friendships and stuff like that, like, well, wait a second, what is your part here, John? Even if I'm justified to have the resentment, what is your part? Oh, okay. So my part is maybe I just don't engage, or my part is just stay away from that person. I don't have to fix them or change them. I'm not interested in that. So it just becomes this idea of working on myself, right? And just letting those things go. And so I think that's really how the forgiveness of my father helps my relationships in the future.
Awesome. I really appreciate all you've shared here so far. Before I go into the closing reading and wrap things up, do you have any final words of wisdom that you'd like to share with us?
If you feel, if you feel like you need help, then you probably need help. And there's somebody out there who's willing to help you. You want to send me a message, I'm happy to talk to anybody. But it's more and more, we're far more, sobriety and the recovery community is so much bigger than it's ever been and so much more open. And the stigma of Alcoholics Anonymous and alcoholics, and there's so many different ways to get sober. And I don't really care which one you use and what works for you. Like, it really doesn't matter to me. And I just know that this is what worked for me. But reach out to somebody and ask for help, because it helps keep me sober to help other people too. So it goes both ways. So I would just say that if you're feeling resentful, if you're feeling angry, if you're feeling like you got to drink, you don't have to. Reach out to somebody close to you. Reach out to somebody who, you just may know peripherally, look for somebody who, they say, who has what you want, and ask them how they got it. And that's all that that's all the success that I have found in life has been through that.
And I just have a big fat amen to say to that. I love that. Thank you so much. Thanks again, John. That was a great RECO12 weekly speaker meeting for all addicts and those wanting to learn more about addiction and the recovery therefrom. If you had any other questions or would like to do any further discussion, yes, you can reach out to John through his, I'll put the contact information in the show notes there for his podcast and website, and you can get contact with him through there. You can also join our discussion forum at RECO12.com/forum and join in the community to ask those questions or get in those discussions there. I invite the audience to come back next week. If you've not yet gone to RECO12.com and submitted your email address to get on the weekly invitation list for these, you can join us live each Friday at noon Central Time. Please do so. Next week, we will be hearing from Faith A., whose topic will be spiritual and personal growth through transitional phases of recovery. Now, John has requested that we launch off into the rest of our day with the Serenity Prayer, and I'll go ahead and be voicing that. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Thy will, not mine, be done. Amen. Keep coming back, everybody. It works if you work it. So work it. You are worth it.
Searching